The sunlight streamed through the glass windows of the penthouse, reflecting off the Italian designer furniture and the artwork scattered throughout the 700 square meters of the apartment. Raphael Miller, just 10 years old, sat on the edge of his king-size bed, surrounded by shelves packed with collectible action figures and giant imported superhero posters. His room looked like a luxury toy store with state-of-the-art video games, limited edition sneakers lined up like trophies, and designer clothes hanging in a closet many adults would envy. On that Monday morning, the boy gazed with disdain at the dark grey Italian suit his mother had left on the upholstered chair. The fabric was fine and expensive, but uncomfortable for a boy who preferred to spend his day in pricey designer hoodies. Raphael sighed with irritation. His father, Edward Miller, one of London's real estate magnates, had insisted he accompany him to an important meeting. Something about impressing investors and showing that the Miller family had successors worthy of their billion-dollar empire. The boy put on the suit with abrupt movements, tying his tie crookedly and slipping on the gleaming leather shoes that pinched his feet. He looked at himself in the mirror and wrinkled his nose. He detested these formal occasions. He detested having to smile at strangers and feign interest in conversations about numbers and projects that meant nothing to him. But he knew there was no choice. In the Miller family, his father's orders were absolute. Raphael left his room and walked down the wide corridor of the penthouse, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. The decor was impeccable and cold, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling and abstract paintings that cost fortunes, but which he had never truly looked at carefully. That place was more a set than a home. His mother, Patricia, was in the living room, checking emails on her tablet while sipping an organic green juice. She barely looked up when her son passed. Turning the corner towards the main elevator, Raphael encountered Mrs. Marlene in the hallway. The 52-year-old woman was in her impeccably clean navy blue uniform, holding a basket of cleaning products in one hand and her worn-out bag in the other. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and there was an expression of quiet tiredness on her face, though she always kept a gentle smile on her lips. "Good morning, Raphael," Mrs. Marlene said, her voice soft and respectful. "How elegant you look today. Are you going out with your father?" Raphael didn't even look at her. He continued walking towards the elevator, pressing the button impatiently. "My father doesn't pay you to chat," he replied coldly without turning his face. "He pays you to clean." Mrs. Marlene felt a pang in her chest, but she lowered her head and didn't respond. She was already accustomed to such treatment. She had worked for the Miller family for almost 3 years, and during that time, she had learned to swallow harsh words, disdainful looks, and the constant feeling of being invisible. She needed that job. She had 3 children to support alone since her husband had left 5 years ago, leaving her a widow with debts that seemed like insurmountable mountains. The elevator doors opened with a soft electronic sound. Raphael entered first, positioning himself in the corner, arms crossed and a sullen expression. Mrs. Marlene hesitated for a second, but then entered as well, holding her basket and her dented lunchbox. She positioned herself in the opposite corner, maintaining the respectful distance she always kept from the family members. The elevator began to descend slowly from the 32nd floor. The silence inside the cabin was heavy. Raphael looked at the digital display marking the floors, mentally counting how much time was left for that uncomfortable moment to end. But then something inside him decided that merely ignoring her wasn't enough. There was a need to feel superior, to vent his frustration about the day that awaited him. He turned to Mrs. Marlene and scrutinized her with critical eyes. "What a terrible smell," he said, wrinkling his nose exaggeratedly. "These cleaning products are disgusting. Aren't you ashamed of walking around smelling like that?" Mrs. Marlene pressed her lips together but didn't respond. She knew that any word could worsen the situation. Raphael, however, was just getting started. He pointed to the lunchbox she was holding. "What's in there? Let me guess. Rice and beans. Maybe a boiled egg if you're lucky." He laughed cruelly. "I'm having lunch at a Japanese restaurant today. £200 per person at least. I bet you've never eaten sushi in your life." Mrs. Marlene felt tears threaten, but she forced herself to maintain composure. She thought of her children. She thought of Luke, her eldest son, 22, who worked as a delivery driver by day and studied accounting by night. She thought of Julia, 18, who dreamed of being a nurse and was preparing for her university entrance exams while working odd jobs as a babysitter. She thought of Peter, the youngest, 12, who drew in old notebooks and had a natural talent for art that she couldn't afford to properly cultivate. For them, she would endure any humiliation. "And your children?" Raphael continued, relentless. "I bet they'll end up like you, cleaning other people's houses, working like slaves. That's the best people like you can do. No education, no future." Mrs. Marlene took a deep breath and finally spoke, her voice trembling but controlled. "My children are honest workers, Raphael, and I am very proud of them." "Proud?" Raphael gave a dry laugh. "Of what? Of being poor? You should be grateful my father gives you this job. If it weren't for him, you'd be on the street begging." The words were like knives, and Mrs. Marlene felt each one. But she didn't reply. She just closed her eyes for an instant and prayed silently, asking for strength to continue. The elevator kept descending, and she counted the seconds until that torture would end. Raphael, satisfied with his little display of cruelty, turned back to the display. He felt powerful, superior, as if he had proven something important to himself. He didn't realize he was only demonstrating his own internal fragility, his desperate need to feel important in a world where, despite all the money, he rarely received genuine attention from his parents. Suddenly, when the elevator was between the 18th and 17th floors, there was a violent jolt. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out, completely, leaving only the faint emergency light on the ceiling. The elevator stopped abruptly, making both occupants sway. Raphael held onto the handrail, his eyes wide with fright. "What was that?" he shouted, his voice rising an octave. "Why did it stop?" Mrs. Marlene, surprisingly, remained calm. She had lived through enough difficult situations in her life to know that panic never helped. She observed the elevator panel, noting that all the buttons were off. "It seems the elevator is stuck," she said calmly. "But don't worry, they'll get us out of here soon." "Soon?" Raphael tried to get his phone out of his pocket with trembling hands. "I need to tell my father. He can't be late for the meeting." But when he looked at the smartphone screen, he saw there was no signal, no connection bars. He tried to dial several times, but nothing worked. Panic began to engulf him. "No signal, no signal," he repeated, his voice growing higher and more desperate. "We're going to die in here." "No one is going to die," Mrs. Marlene said firmly. "Take a deep breath, Raphael. The building has a security system." Someone must have already noticed the elevator stopped, but Raphael wasn't listening. He began to punch the elevator door with his fists, shouting for help. His face was red, and sweat started to run down his forehead, staining the white collar of his expensive shirt. He kicked the door, hurting his own foot and yelling in frustration and fear. "Raphael, you need to calm down," Mrs. Marlene said, her voice still tranquil despite the situation. "Shouting and struggling will only tire you out more and use up the air we have in here." "The air?" Raphael stopped abruptly, his eyes wide. "Are we going to run out of air? Are we going to suffocate?" "We won't suffocate," Mrs. Marlene replied patiently. "Elevators have ventilation, but the more you agitate it, the hotter you feel and the more uncomfortable it gets." Raphael leaned against the metal wall of the elevator, sliding down to sit on the floor. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked, and his hair disheveled. He looked much smaller and more vulnerable than he had just a few minutes ago, when he mocked the employee so cruelly. Tears began to roll down his face, and he angrily wiped them away, ashamed to cry in front of the woman he had humiliated. Mrs. Marlene watched the boy for a moment and then carefully sat on the floor as well, on the other side of the small cabin. She placed her cleaning basket beside her and opened her bag, taking out a small bottle of water. "There's a little water here if you want," she offered, extending the bottle to him. Raphael looked at the bottle and then at Mrs. Marlene. For an instant, his pride wanted to refuse, but his throat was dry and the heat inside the elevator was increasing. He took the bottle with trembling hands and took a few sips, then returned it. "Thank you," he murmured, barely able to look at her. "You're welcome," Mrs. Marlene replied simply, putting the bottle away again. They remained silent for a few minutes. Raphael could hear his own breathing and the faint hum of the elevator's emergency system. The dim light created strange shadows on the walls, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. He had never experienced anything like this. In his protected and controlled life, he had never been in a situation where he couldn't simply demand an immediate solution. His money, his surname, his arrogance, none of it mattered in here. "How long do you think it will take?" he asked, his voice smaller and more frightened. "I don't know," Mrs. Marlene answered honestly. "It could be a few minutes, it could be longer, but they will get us out of here. Have faith." "Faith," Raphael repeated bitterly. "My father always says faith is for weak people who don't have control over their own lives." Mrs. Marlene looked at the boy with an expression that mixed pity and understanding. "And you believe that?" Raphael thought for a moment, surprised by the question. "I don't know. I've never really thought about it." Mrs. Marlene nodded slowly. "I have a lot of faith, Raphael. It's what keeps me going every day. When I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, when I take 3 buses to get to work, when I come home at 9 at night and still need to cook, do laundry and help my children with their homework. Faith gives me strength when my body cries out for rest." Raphael watched her with curiosity. It was the first time he had truly paid attention to her, not as an object of service, but as a person with an entire life outside that apartment. "You do all that every day?" he asked. "Every day except Sunday," she replied with a small, tired smile. "On Sunday I go to church in the morning and then spend the day with my children. It's my favorite day of the week." Raphael had never considered that the people who worked in his house had their own lives, families, routines, dreams. To him they simply appeared, did their job, and disappeared. They were like moving furniture. "What are your children like?" he asked, surprising himself with the genuine interest in his voice. Mrs. Marlene's eyes lit up, and for the first time Raphael saw a true sparkle of joy on her face. "Oh, my children are my greatest treasure," she said, her voice full of pride. "Luke, the eldest, is 22. He works as a delivery driver during the day and studies accounting at night. He's such a determined young man, Raphael. He only sleeps 5 hours a night, but he never complains. He wants to give us a better life." "And the others?" "Julia is 18. She's my dreamer. She wants to be a nurse. She takes care of everyone, you know. It's always been like that since she was little. When her younger brother fell and scraped his knee, she was the one who bandaged it, who sang for him to stop crying. She's studying for her university entrance exams and works as a babysitter on weekends to help with expenses." Mrs. Marlene paused, and her smile grew even sweeter. "And then there's Peter, my youngest, 12 years old. That boy was born with a pencil in his hand, I swear. He's been drawing since he learned to hold a pencil. He does portraits, landscapes, characters he invents. He draws on any paper he finds, old notebooks, scrap paper, even on the margins of school books. I keep all his drawings in a box under my bed." Raphael listened in silence, processing every word. He thought of his own parents. When was the last time his mother spoke of him with such affection? When was the last time his father truly showed he knew who he was, beyond being the heir to the real estate empire? He had everything money could buy, but he had never felt that kind of unconditional love that emanated from Mrs. Marlene's voice when she spoke of her children. "Your parents never talk about you like that, do they?" Mrs. Marlene asked softly, as if she had read his thoughts. Raphael felt a lump in his throat. "My parents are always busy," he replied, trying to sound indifferent but failing. "Meetings, trips, important dinners. My mother spends her day at the spa or with friends. My father lives at the office or on construction sites. They don't have time for those things." "To love their son?" Mrs. Marlene asked gently. "That shouldn't require time, Raphael. Love isn't an appointment on a schedule." Raphael didn't answer. He had never thought of it that way. He had always assumed that was the normal life of rich families, that affection was replaced by expensive gifts and material privileges. But now, sitting on the dirty floor of a broken elevator, talking to a woman he had despised minutes earlier, he began to question everything he had always accepted as truth. "Have you ever been hungry?" he asked suddenly, his words coming out before he could filter them. Mrs. Marlene wasn't offended by the direct question. She nodded slowly. Yes, I have, several times. When my husband left, and I was alone with 3 small children, there were days when we only had plain biscuits to eat. I would divide a packet into 3 parts and give it to them, saying I had already had lunch at work. But I hadn't had lunch. There was no work back then. I sold sweets at the traffic lights just to afford the basics. Raphael felt his stomach churn. He thought of all the times he had wasted food, pushing his plate away still full because he was bored with the taste. He thought of the parties at his house, with tables laden with gourmet foods that were thrown away afterward. How did you get out of that situation? Raphael asked, genuinely interested now. Mrs. Marlene sighed, remembering those difficult days. It was thanks to my neighbors, she said with gratitude in her voice. In the community where I live, people help each other. When Mrs. Teresa, my neighbor, found out I was struggling, she started bringing me packed meals. She would say she had made too much food, but I knew she was sharing the little she had with us. Mr. Joseph, who has a small grocery store on the corner, gave me credit when I had no money and never charged interest. That's how we survived until I got this job with your family. Raphael had never imagined that poor people could help each other in such a way. In his world, everything had a price. Everything was a transaction. The idea of someone sharing the little they had without expecting anything in return seemed strange and at the same time beautiful. And you weren't angry? He asked. Angry at life? At God? I don't know, for going through all that. Mrs. Marlene thought carefully before answering. Of course I had moments of despair, Raphael. Moments when I cried a lot, questioned everything, felt wronged. But constant anger only poisons you from within. I chose to be grateful for what I have, not bitter for what I don't. I have my health, my healthy children, a roof over our heads and food on the table. Many people have less than that. But you work so hard, he protested. You wake up early, come back late, earn little. Isn't that unfair? It's difficult, I won't lie, but it's not unfair because I have dignity in my work. So I clean, organize, care. There's no shame in that. The shame would be to steal, deceive, harm others to get ahead. My work is honest, and that gives me peace of mind. Raphael was impressed by the maturity and wisdom of that woman. He, at just 10 years old, and with all the privileges in the world, had never thought about concepts like dignity, honesty, or peace of mind. He had always assumed that success was measured in money and power, and that any means were justifiable to achieve those ends. It was what he saw at home, what he heard in the conversations of the adults around him. My father says that in the business world you have to be strong. You can't feel sorry for anyone, he commented, repeating words he had heard 1,000 times. He says, showing weakness is losing. Mrs. Marlene looked directly into the boy's eyes. And you think kindness is weakness, Raphael? He opened his mouth to answer affirmatively, but the words didn't come out. Because at that moment, trapped in an elevator, the calmest and strongest person there wasn't him, the rich and powerful boy. It was her, the humble employee he had despised. Are you afraid of me? Mrs. Marlene asked gently. No, Raphael replied, confused. Why would I be? Exactly. You're not afraid of me because you know I would never hurt you. But you are afraid now, afraid of this situation, afraid of the unknown. And who is keeping you calm? Who offered you water? Who is here keeping you company and preventing you from falling into total panic? Kindness is not weakness, Raphael. Often it is the greatest strength there is. Raphael felt his eyes sting again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from shame. He remembered how he had treated that woman a few minutes ago, the cruel words he had said, the way he made her feel inferior. And now she was there, offering comfort and wisdom when he needed it most. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, his voice breaking, for what I said before. I was horrible to you. I had no right to say those things. Mrs. Marlene gave a sad smile. You are just a child, Raphael, a child who is learning from the examples around you. But you still have time to choose what kind of person you want to be. What do you mean? You can choose to be like your father, focused only on money and power, treating people as stepping stones to climb. Or you can choose to be different. You can choose to see people, truly see them, and treat them with respect and kindness. That choice is yours. Raphael thought about it. For the first time in his life, someone was telling him he had the power to choose who he would be. His parents had always charted his path. He would be an heir, take over the business, continue the legacy. But no one ever asked what kind of person he wanted to be beyond that. "What is true wealth?" he asked suddenly, remembering something she had said earlier. Mrs. Marlene smiled, and it was a genuine smile, full of peace. "True wealth, Raphael, is having health to work and enjoy life. It's having people who truly love you, not for what you have, but for what you are. It's having a clear conscience and being able to sleep peacefully at night. It's having faith in something bigger than yourself. It's having happy memories, shared laughter, sincere hugs. Money can buy many things, but it can't buy those." "But money helps, doesn't it?" Raphael argued, still clinging to his old worldview. "Of course it helps," she admitted. "It would be a lie to say it wouldn't make my life easier to have more money. I could pay for a better school for Peter to develop his drawing talent. I could help Julia get into a private nursing college. I could give Luke an opportunity to work less and study more. But the lack of money hasn't made me less happy or less complete as a person. It hasn't stopped me from loving my children with all my strength. It hasn't taken away my dignity." Raphael absorbed every word. He thought of his enormous room, full of expensive toys he barely touched. He thought of the designer clothes he wore once and then forgot. He thought of dinners in restaurants where each dish cost more than Mrs. Marlene's monthly salary. And then he thought of how lonely he felt at night, when the nanny left and his parents were too busy to say goodnight. He thought of how he longed for a real conversation with them, something beyond questions about school grades or reprimands for inappropriate behavior. "Are you happy?" he asked Mrs. Marlene. She thought for a long moment. "I have joy," she finally replied. "Happiness is a feeling that comes and goes, like waves. But joy is something deeper. It's knowing that despite the difficulties, you are living a life with purpose. I have purpose. My children are my purpose. So yes, I have joy." Raphael envied that at that instant. He envied the clarity, the certainty, the sense of purpose. He had everything and nothing at the same time. Suddenly they heard a metallic sound coming from above. Muffled voices echoed through the elevator shaft. Someone was working to get them out. Raphael felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief at leaving that confined and frightening space. Apprehension at returning to the real world, where that honest and transformative conversation would be just a memory. "It seems they'll get us out soon," Mrs. Marlene said, standing up and straightening her uniform. Raphael also stood up but remained still, looking at her. "Mrs. Marlene," he said hesitantly, "I don't want to forget what you taught me here. I don't want to go back to being that horrible person I was before." "Then don't go back," she said simply. "The choice is yours, Raphael. It always has been." The voices outside grew louder and clearer. Raphael could hear instructions being given, tools being used. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the narrow cabin. After almost 2 hours trapped inside, freedom was near. But the boy didn't just feel relief. He also felt a strange sadness, as if something precious was about to end. "We have access to the cabin," a male voice shouted from outside. "We're opening the doors manually. Stand clear of the entrance." Mrs. Marlene and Raphael took a few steps back. Then, with a loud creak, the metal doors began to open slowly. The light from the 17th floor corridor flooded the elevator, making them both blink. There were 3 uniformed firefighters and 2 elevator technicians there, in addition to the building manager, Mr. Arthur, a 60-year-old man with a grey mustache and a worried expression. "Thank goodness you're all right," Mr. Arthur said, offering his hand to help Mrs. Marlene out. "Are you hurt, ma'am? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, thank you," Mrs. Marlene replied, stepping out of the elevator with dignity despite her crumpled uniform and visible exhaustion. "The boy is fine too." One of the firefighters helped Raphael out. The boy stepped into the corridor and his knees trembled slightly. He was dizzy from the adrenaline and the heat he had endured inside. "Are you all right, lad?" the firefighter asked, examining him. "Want to sit down for a bit?" Before Raphael could answer, he heard his father's irritated voice echoing down the corridor. "Raphael, where are you?" Edward Miller appeared, turning the corner, his suit impeccable, hair perfectly slicked back, and an expression of pure impatience on his face. He didn't even look at the firefighters or Mrs. Marlene. His eyes went straight to his son. "Do you know what a mess this caused? The meeting has already started. I had to ask them to postpone it just because of you." Raphael felt the familiar weight of paternal disappointment, but this time something was different. He looked back at Mrs. Marlene, who was being ignored by everyone as if she were invisible. Anger surged within him, not against her, but against that injustice. "Father, we were stuck for almost 2 hours. It was scary." Edward made an impatient gesture with his hand. "You're fine, aren't you? So let's go. We need to leave now." He began to pull Raphael by the arm, but the boy pulled away. "Wait, Father." Raphael turned and walked back to Mrs. Marlene. She looked at him with surprise when he stopped in front of her. Then, before everyone present, the boy held her hand with his 2 small hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice clear and sincere. "For everything. For keeping me calm, for sharing your water, for talking to me. You are a special person, Mrs. Marlene, a very special person." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She lightly squeezed the boy's hands. "God bless you, Raphael, and remember what we talked about." Mr. Arthur, the firefighters, and the technicians watched the scene with surprised expressions. It was not common to see anyone from the Miller family treating employees with such respect and affection. "Raphael, now!" Edward's voice cut through the moment. "We don't have time for this." Raphael reluctantly let go of Mrs. Marlene's hands and returned to his father. Edward didn't even look at the employee. He simply turned and began to walk quickly towards the service elevator, which was still working. Raphael looked back one more time, seeing Mrs. Marlene wave discreetly. He waved back before being pulled away by his father. In the car on the way to the meeting, Edward drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on his cell phone, making calls and giving orders. Raphael sat in the back seat looking out the window, but not really seeing anything. His mind was still in the elevator, replaying every word of the conversation with Mrs. Marlene. "You look terrible," Edward commented, looking in the rearview mirror. "Wrinkled suit, messy hair. What will the investors think?" "Father," Raphael said hesitantly, "can I ask you something? Quickly, I'm busy. Why do you never really talk to me?" Edward frowned, taking his eyes off the road for a second to look at his son in the mirror. "What are you talking about? I talk to you." "No, you don't. You give orders, ask about grades, complain when I do something wrong. But you never ask me how I am, what I think, what I feel." Edward let out an impatient sigh. "Raphael, I don't have time for childish philosophy now. You have everything a child could want. Huge house, expensive toys, elite private school. What more do you want?" "For you to know me," Raphael replied, his voice small, "the way Mrs. Marlene knows her children." "Mrs. Marlene," Edward repeated with disdain. "The employee. She had too much free time in the elevator to fill your head with sentimental nonsense." "It wasn't nonsense," Raphael protested, feeling courage grow within him. "She taught me important things. Things you never taught me." Edward parked abruptly in front of the office building where the meeting was to take place. He turned off the engine and turned completely to face his son. "Listen closely, Raphael. I teach you what matters in the real world. Business, money, power. These conversations about feelings and kindness are beautiful in theory, but they don't pay bills. They don't build empires. You need to understand that now, if you want to succeed someday." "What if I don't want to succeed your way?" Raphael asked, surprising himself with his boldness. Edward was silent for a moment, studying his son with cold eyes. "Then you'll be a failure," he said simply. "And failures have no place in the Miller family. Now fix that suit and come on. We have a meeting." He got out of the car and slammed the door shut. Raphael sat for a few more seconds, feeling the weight of those words. But then he remembered Mrs. Marlene's smile when she spoke of her children, the joy in her voice despite all the difficulties. He remembered that she had said the choice was his. The meeting took place in a conference room on the 40th floor with panoramic views of all of London. There was a long, polished wooden table surrounded by executives in expensive suits, all looking at presentations on a giant screen. "Raphael," was placed in a chair in the corner, where he was supposed to remain quiet and observe how his father conducted business. The meeting was about a new real estate development. Edward presented slides showing a plot of land in East London, currently occupied by a community of 20 families. The project was to build a luxury apartment complex on that site. "The location is perfect," Edward explained, pointing to the map. "Close to the underground, with rapidly developing infrastructure. The return on investment will be at least 300% in 3 years. And the families living there?" One of the investors asked. "How will the relocation be handled?" Edward smiled confidently. "We have everything arranged. We will offer minimal compensation, only what is legally required. Most will accept without problems. Those who resist, well, we have competent lawyers to deal with that." Raphael, who had been distracted looking out the window, suddenly paid attention. 20 families, people with homes, lives, stories. He thought of Mrs. Marlene and her children. How devastating it would be to lose the place where they lived. "And where will these families go?" Raphael asked aloud, interrupting the meeting. All the executives turned to look at the boy. Edward briefly closed his eyes, irritated. "Raphael, that's none of your concern. But you said there are 20 families. They're going to lose their homes. Where will they go?" One of the investors chuckled softly. "The boy has a soft heart. That's cute." Edward forced a smile. "Raphael, you need to understand that this is business. These people will receive financial compensation. What they do afterward is their problem." "But it's unfair," Raphael insisted, his voice getting louder. "You're taking their homes just to build expensive apartments they'll never be able to afford." The room fell, silent. Edward was red with suppressed anger, but maintained his composure in front of the investors. "We'll discuss this at home," he said through clenched teeth. "Now, gentlemen, continuing with the presentation." But Raphael couldn't keep quiet anymore. Something inside him had changed in that elevator. He saw Mrs. Marlene's face in each of those 20 anonymous families. "My father always told me that business isn't charity," Raphael said, standing up from his chair. "But where is the humanity? Where is the respect for people?" "Raphael, sit down now," Edward ordered, his voice harsh. "No, I won't stay quiet while you destroy the lives of 20 families without a second thought." Edward stood up, apologized to the investors, and grabbed Raphael's arm tightly, dragging him out of the meeting room. In the empty corridor, he knelt down and looked his son in the eyes with fury. "What on earth got into you? You embarrassed me in front of important clients." "I embarrassed you?" Raphael retorted, his own tears of frustration beginning to fall. "You're the one who should be ashamed, taking people's homes as if they were nothing." "They are nothing," Edward shouted. "They're obstacles to progress. That's how the world works." "Then the world is wrong," Raphael shouted back, "and so are you." Edward was about to respond when his cell phone rang. He answered abruptly, listened for a few seconds, and then hung up, running a hand over his face in frustration. "I need to get back to the meeting. You're going home with the driver, and we'll have a serious conversation when I get there." Raphael was driven back to the penthouse by the family driver, a silent man who asked no questions about the boy's red and swollen face. When he got home, his mother wasn't even there. A message on the fridge said she had gone to a charity lunch and would be back in the evening. The apartment was empty and silent. Raphael went straight to his room and threw himself on the bed, still wearing the crumpled suit. He thought about everything that had happened on that impossible day. He felt confused, frustrated, and alone. The next day, Raphael woke up early for the first time in years. Normally he slept late, being woken by the nanny when he was already late for school. But that morning at 6 o'clock he was up, dressed and in the kitchen. When Mrs. Marlene arrived at 7, she was surprised to find the boy there awkwardly fiddling with a coffee maker. "Raphael, what are you doing up so early?" He turned, and she saw determination in his eyes. "I wanted to talk to you before my parents woke up." Mrs. Marlene put her things aside and approached carefully. "About what?" Raphael pulled out a chair for her, and then sat down himself, placing a white envelope on the table. "Yesterday, after we got out of the elevator, I went to a meeting with my father. They're going to remove 20 families from their homes to build a luxury building. And no one cares. No one asks where these people will go if they have the means to start over. It's like they're invisible. Mrs. Marlene listened in silence, her heart heavy. I can't change what my father does, not yet, Raphael continued, but I can do something. My monthly allowance is £5,000. I spend it on things I don't even need. Player trading cards, sneakers I wear once, games I get bored with in a week. He pushed the envelope towards her. Here's £2,500. It's half of my allowance for this month. I want you to use it for your children, for Peter's school, for Julia's studies, to help Luke, for whatever you need. Mrs. Marlene looked at the envelope as if it would burn her hands. Raphael, I can't accept this. Your parents will be furious with me. They'll think I manipulated you. No, they won't know. This money is mine. They give it to me, and I can do what I want with it, and I choose to do this. But Raphael, please, he interrupted, his voice pleading. You taught me that true wealth isn't money, but money can help. It can provide opportunities, and I want to give that opportunity to your family as a way of thanking you for everything you taught me in that elevator. Mrs. Marlene felt tears stream down her face. She looked at that 10-year-old boy who just a day before was arrogant and cruel and saw a genuine transformation. She saw compassion, generosity, and courage. If your parents find out and get angry, I'll give the money back, okay? Raphael negotiated. Mrs. Marlene hesitated, but then took the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you, Raphael. You don't know how much this will help. My Julia needs materials for her prep course, and Peter needs new notebooks for his drawings. Then use it, he said, smiling for the first time in days. And don't worry, everything will be fine. In the following 3 months, something extraordinary happened. Raphael changed completely. At school, he stopped mocking less privileged classmates and began defending them from bullies. He stopped wasting food at lunch and started eating everything he was served. He treated all the household staff with respect, asking their names, how they were, genuinely interested in their lives. Every month he gave half of his allowance to Mrs. Marlene, always in the early morning before anyone else woke up. With this money, her family's life visibly improved. Julia was able to buy the books for her nursing prep course. Peter received proper art supplies and began creating even more impressive drawings. Luke was able to reduce his delivery hours and dedicate more time to his studies. But secrets, however well-intentioned, eventually come out. It was a Tuesday morning when everything fell apart. Edward was in the kitchen exceptionally early, getting coffee before an important video conference. Mrs. Marlene hadn't arrived yet, but Raphael was there as he had been every morning for the past 3 months, waiting to meet her. "What are you doing up so early?" Edward asked, surprised to see his son at 6:30 in the morning. "I just woke up early," Raphael replied, trying to sound casual. Edward grabbed his coffee cup and was about to leave when he noticed something on the kitchen table. It was one of the envelopes Raphael used, with Mrs. Marlene's name written by hand. The envelope was half open and he could see banknotes inside. "What is this?" Edward picked up the envelope before Raphael could react. "Nothing, Father. It's mine." Edward opened the envelope completely and counted the money. £2,500. "Where did you get this?" "It's my allowance. I can do what I want with it." Edward looked at the name written on the envelope, then at his son, and his face turned red with anger. "You're giving your money to the employee." "It's not like that, Father." "Then how is it? Did she ask for it? Did she blackmail you? Did she make you feel sorry for her?" "No." Raphael stood up from the chair. "It was my idea. She didn't even want to accept it." At that moment, the kitchen door opened and Mrs. Marlene entered, her bag on her shoulder and a cheerful expression on her face that died instantly when she saw the scene. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice trembling. Edward turned to her with fury. "How long has this been going on? How much money have you taken from my son?" "I haven't taken anything, sir," she protested, her hands shaking. "It was Raphael who insisted. I tried to refuse several times." "Of course you tried. But you kept accepting, didn't you? How much have you taken already? 5,000? 10,000? "Father, stop!" Raphael shouted, running to stand between them. "She's not the villain here." "You don't understand anything, Raphael. She's taking advantage of you." "She's not." Tears began to stream down the boy's face. "She saved me. When we were stuck in the elevator, she taught me things you never taught me. She showed me what it means to be a real person." Edward was paralyzed for a moment and then let out a bitter laugh. "So that's it? 2. Howard's stuck in an elevator with you and she became your hero. And I, who work every day to give you everything, am the villain." "You give me everything but attention," Raphael retorted, his voice breaking. "You give me money, expensive toys, clothes. But you don't know me. You don't even know what my favorite color is, what my favorite food is, what I like to do. Mrs. Marlene knows her children. She knows their dreams, their difficulties, their joys. She truly loves them." Edward opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. He looked at his son, as if seeing him for the first time. "You are fired," he said to Mrs. Marlene, his voice controlled but cold. "You can collect your things and leave. I'll pay you for the full month, but I don't want you here." "No!" Raphael ran and grabbed his father's arm. "You can't fire her. She didn't do anything wrong." "She manipulated you," Edward insisted, but his voice was less firm. "She didn't manipulate anyone." Raphael was sobbing now. "She's the most honest person I know. She tried to refuse the money several times. She works hard, wakes up early, takes 3 buses to get here, and all to support 3 children alone. She is strong, she is dignified, she is kind. Everything you say doesn't matter, but it does matter." Edward looked at Mrs. Marlene, who stood silently, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you accept the money?" he asked, his voice lower. Mrs. Marlene took a deep breath before answering. "Because I saw it was important to him, Mr. Miller, not for the money itself, though God knows how it helped my family, but because he needed to feel he could make a difference in someone's life. He needed to feel he had purpose beyond being a rich heir. I accepted because it was his way of exercising the kindness that exists within him, and I didn't want to kill that." Edward remained silent, processing those words. He looked at his son, truly looked, and saw something he had neglected for years. He saw a boy who was desperate for real connection, for meaning, for love that didn't come with conditions and expectations. Slowly, Edward pulled out a chair and sat down. He gestured for Mrs. Marlene and Raphael to sit down as well. They obeyed hesitantly. "Tell me," Edward said, looking at Mrs. Marlene. "Tell me about what happened in that elevator." And Mrs. Marlene told him. She told him about the cruel words Raphael had initially said, about how he panicked when they got stuck, about the conversations they had. She spoke about her children, about their difficulties, about their joys. She spoke about how she saw the boy transform before her eyes, changing from arrogant to humble, from cruel to compassionate. Raphael listened in silence, sometimes ashamed remembering his initial words, sometimes proud remembering how he had changed. When she finished, Edward was silent for a long time. Then he looked at his son. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Raphael shrugged. "Because I knew you'd say it was nonsense, that feelings don't matter, that business is business and people are just numbers." Edward felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. That was exactly what he always said, the words he repeated like a mantra, but hearing them from his son's mouth, they sounded hollow and cruel. "I'm raising you to be strong," he said, but his voice was uncertain. "You're raising me to be empty," Raphael replied with brutal honesty. "Like you." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward looked at his hands, then at the money envelope still on the table, then at Mrs. Marlene, and finally at Raphael. "I don't know when I became this man," he said finally, his voice low. "My own father was like this, cold, distant, focused only on business, and I swore I would be different, but I look at myself now and I see him." "You can change," Raphael said softly. "It's not too late." Edward looked at Mrs. Marlene. "I'm sorry," he said, and there was genuine sincerity in his voice. "I'm sorry for treating you as invisible, for never having asked your name in the first 6 months you worked here, for not having noticed your character, your strength, your dignity. You are not fired. In fact, you deserve a raise, a significant raise." Mrs. Marlene blinked in surprise, unable to believe what she was hearing. And you, Edward turned to Raphael. You can continue with your donations, but with one condition. What? Raphael asked suspiciously. That I can participate too, that you teach me how to be generous, how to be human, how to be a real father. Raphael felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He stood up from his chair and hugged his father, something he hadn't done in years. Edward stiffened for a second, but then his arms wrapped around his son and he hugged him back tightly. Mrs. Marlene watched the scene with tears in her eyes, her heart overflowing with gratitude. She had gone to work that morning expecting just another ordinary day, and now she was witnessing a transformation that seemed impossible. I don't know if I can change completely, Edward said, still holding his son, but I want to try. For you. It's a start, Raphael said, smiling through his tears. Edward released his son and then did something that surprised everyone. He stood up and extended his hand to Mrs. Marlene, not condescendingly, but with genuine respect. Thank you, he said, for saving my son, for showing me what I was missing. Mrs. Marlene shook his hand, feeling the firmness of the grip and the sincerity behind it. That morning, the barriers that separated boss and employee, rich and poor, began to dissolve. They didn't disappear completely because social reality was still there, but something fundamental had changed. There was mutual recognition of humanity, of dignity, of intrinsic worth that had nothing to do with money or position. 3 months later, Raphael was in Peter's room for the first time. Mrs. Marlene had invited him to see her home and family, and Edward, surprisingly, had allowed and even encouraged it. The house was simple, with only 3 small rooms in a humble neighborhood in South London, but it was clean, organized, and full of love. Peter proudly showed his drawings to Raphael, sheets and sheets of incredible art created with the materials that the money from the donations had bought. Julia spoke excitedly about her acceptance into the nursing prep course. Luke personally thanked Raphael for the help that allowed him to reduce his working hours and improve his grades at college. Raphael looked around that small house and felt something he had never felt in his 700-square-meter penthouse. He felt human warmth. He felt belonging. He felt real love, not conditioned by expectations or performances. That elevator that had stopped between floors was not a failure. It was a gift. It was the moment when an arrogant boy learned to see beyond himself, and a humble woman showed that true. Education does not come from expensive schools, but from character and life experience. And as Raphael returned home that night, he looked at the London sky and smiled, because he understood that no matter how high an elevator goes, it is character that defines a person's true height. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Raphael and Mrs. Marlene's story has touched your hearts. Sometimes it's the most unexpected moments that teach us the most valuable lessons about humanity, compassion, and the true meaning of wealth. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and remind us of what truly matters. Share in the comments how this story made you feel, or tell us about a transformative moment in your own life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your reflections.